I'm just going to speak through the general data protection regulation slide that we normally do for these, because this one we will definitely be recording it. So the recording will be hosted on YouTube and shared with the wider community at Kenwyn, and also be available by accessing the webinars on the TDGR website. So just to let you know, it will be available in all those places. The historical and educational events are being recorded in this way so that they can act as resources available to our guild members in future. If you do not wish to become a part of the recording but would still like to watch and listen live, then please stop video and mute yourself. If you need help to do this, if you could ask us now if you do need help. So I'm just going to scroll up and down the screens. I can't see anyone that's manically waving their hands or saying help. No, I think we're good. Okay. So if you could ask you nicely if we could just only unmute yourself if you're happy to be recorded, and that the recording will be hosted on YouTube and the TGR website. So if you could save any questions until the end, then Helen can answer them then. And if you could avoid using the chat function because it pops up in the video that we're going to create. So the speaker will review the questions at the end. If you participate, if you could introduce yourself at the first time that you speak with your name and your tower, please, that would be great. Please do not share your screen unless directed to do so by the host. And if you're happy to be recorded today, you can withdraw your consent to be recorded at any time. So if you want to inform me, TGR Secretary, if your consent changes, then that's fine. So that's got us covered now. I shall stop sharing my screen and I shall just quickly introduce you to Helen Perry, who's going to talk to us today about the Kenwyn restoration, the bells, the restoration project at Kenwyn ongoing. So it isn't completed, far from it. It's a really interesting one, this one, because it is kind of like halfway through, I suppose, or ongoing. So, and we would really like to hear from anybody else who is attempting or to organise a restoration project as well, because I think they're really interesting. And of course, if we can help with raising awareness into local communities of those restoration projects, and that is a really good thing for us to be doing, I think. So I'm going to hand you over to Helen. Here we go.
Lovely. Well, thank you all very much for coming along this evening. If we can manage to share the screen and get the presentation working all right, then we'll be okay. So I'll just see if I can do that a minute. Keep your fingers crossed. Right, so hopefully that should be the first slide, and you should see a picture of Kenwyn Church there in the spring. Quite a few of you have already given generously to the bell restoration project at Kenwyn, and it's great to be able to have the opportunity to update you as to how it's all going and where we've got to, because it all seems to be taking rather a long time. Having said that, if I just talk about the current restoration project, we'll be gone in 5 minutes. So what I thought I'd do is widen it out a little bit further. We're all custodians of our bells, just temporary custodians. People looked after them before we came along, and we hope to hand them on to people to look after them once we're gone. So I thought I'd widen out the talk a bit and just go back and talk about some of the previous restoration projects before we go on and talk about the current one. Now, Robert promised those of you that were here last week a photograph of me like you've never seen me before. I think Phil Tremaine's already ruined that by putting a picture up on Birmingham in Cornwall. But I was dressed up as a Christingle this afternoon at our church Christingle service. So I thought, just to make sure you're all still awake at this point, I'd just add an extra slide to give you all a bit of a smile. Now, Kenwyn bells, Eric goes round recording all the bells, and he's put a couple of things up on YouTube. And if this one works, you should hopefully hear what Kenwyn bells sound like at the moment. So keep your fingers crossed. So that's Kenwyn bells ringing grands and triples. Now, we weren't sure if the video would work, so we put in another set of ringing, and there's a prize for anybody who can guess what this is, because I've no idea. So that's what the bells sound like at the moment, and hopefully we'll have them back ringing eventually once we get past all the COVID, all the restoration work and all the rest of it that's got to happen. So widening it out a little bit more, the tower at Kenwyn, they don't exactly know, but they think it might be 13th, 14th, 15th century. It's the oldest part of the church, and there have been bells hung in there, maybe only 3, from around about 1500, something like that. The church itself, the main building, by 1819, it was virtually derelict. It had no roof. The supporting pillars were tied together with metal bars, and they had a big appeal, got about £1,000 together and put it all back into a nice church, had a celebration. A few years later, 1860, big thunderstorm just after Christmas, hit one of the pinnacles, fell through the roof of the church, and had to start all over again. So had to restore the pinnacle, restore the church. So although the tower's old, the building itself is much more modern building. If you look at it from the inside, we now ring from that gallery, but originally the tower was completely filled in. This arch was completely filled in. And they had a singer's gallery round about where we ring from now. And the singers were paid. And if you look back in the history, it says that they monopolised the music and they were incapable in singing in either time or tune. So they decided to take the singers' gallery down, get rid of the singers, and put an organ elsewhere in the church. So having got rid of the singers and the gallery, they were then able to open up the tower, and they put in the lovely window there. And obviously we now ring, as people know, from that gallery. So that's how it looks today. Now, over the years, very important people from Truro, it was like a gentleman's club with the ringers. No women, of course, all posh people. So there's like the curate of St Mary's, which is now the cathedral. There was William Lemon, was one of the ringers, and his family give the name to Lemon Street. Apparently, he had a set of bells hung up in his passageway, which I rather assume was servants' bells. He took them all down, brought them down to Kenwyn, and used them to teach the ringers. I rather assume that it was to teach them to ring chord changes. Can't think what else they'd have done with them. It was such a fashionable pastime that the Squire of Probus had a group of ringers that went from church to church, which of course is what a lot of us do today, isn't it? We ring at one tower, then go on to another tower. But they were all paid, and he ended up bankrupting himself by paying all the ringers. So don't know quite what happened then, but that was the end of that. The ringers at Kenwyn rang for all sorts of things, like you can see a list there, like Battle of Trafalgar, Victory at Waterloo. But actually they were paid to ring for a lot of them, which don't seem to get that today. If we want to ring for something, we might ring, but they don't pay us. And I found a note saying that around 1780, John Tippett, who was the church warden, was responsible for keeping the bells in order, but his wife rang the Kiddlywink, in other words, the local pub, and we're not quite sure whether it was next to the Lich Gate or opposite the Lich Gate. But there was a note that the ringers, she was paid 5 shillings to provide refreshments for the ringers who'd rung for the bishop. Now, I reckon 5 shillings in those days is about £45 today. So I was led to speculate how much beer £45 bought for the ringers back in 1780. But if you want to know more about beer, maybe you need to talk to Haley about that one. But apparently the price of ale was set by law until around about 1800. So we can speculate that they had a merry time there. So to get back to the old bells that were there in around about 1900, you can see there's a list of them there. They were from all over the place, all different founders. Apparently they were really difficult to ring. They sounded terrible. But one of the things we did note is that the old 7th had Edward Carlyon's name on it. And obviously Edward Carlyon, there's a long family of Carlyons go back in Kenwyn Church. And obviously we fondly remember Edward, who left us this year. So the name's carried on, you know, all those years. So anyway, the bells sounded absolutely terrible. They were dreadful to ring. So along came Sir Robert Harvey, whose family had worshipped at Kenwyn for generations. He was worth a small fortune, and he said, all right, I'll pay for you to have a new set of bells then. So the church council met in April 1905, and by May the same year, the bells were cast. Now, how long would it take now to do that? You'd have to have the PCC meeting, get a plan, raise the money, get a faculty. It would take months and months and months, if not years. But there they were, done within a month. They were done. So what about this great man, Sir Robert Harvey, who gave all the money? Well, he was a local churro boy, and he was apprenticed to the local engineering works. He ended up abroad and made his money mining, or whatever you do, with saltpeter. And apparently that's a constituent of gunpowder. So one wonders whether some of it came back to the mines in Cornwall where they did a lot of blasting. But at any rate, he was abroad for a few years, made his fortune. So he got fed up with being abroad, came back to Cornwall, but actually he lived near Totnes. And I managed to find a picture of his house, which has now been divided up into flats. And you can see inside what a grand place it was. So he obviously had a lot of money. And he died in Falmouth in 1930. And it says that the ringers at Kenwyn rang a muffled peal, which I assume has to have been a call change peal. So that was how they raised the money for it very quickly. Now, Robert Harvey himself, I think, must have been quite a character. He gave the very first ring of bells that were hung at Buckfast Abbey. And apparently they should actually have gone to another church in Devon, but he fell out with that church and he decided to give the bells elsewhere. And he was obviously quite good at falling out with his neighbours, because the same church in Devon only had 2 faces on the clock which he also gave, because he fell out with his neighbours and he wouldn't let them have a clock face over their estate. He didn't want them to know what the time was. So that was Robert Harvey. So back to the bells. There's a picture of the oldest bell there, the second, which was cast in 1747. They lowered it down from the tower, rolled them all out into the churchyard. They loaded them onto a horse and cart, and Robert and I speculated they had to go to Loughborough. Did they take them by horse and cart all the way to Loughborough? Did they go on a train? Absolutely no idea. But at any rate, they got to Loughborough. They're all broken down, melted down to make the new bells. So there they are, up in Loughborough. Not a very good picture, but you get a flavour of the bells being cast there. And from what I understand, it's very much the same as it is up there today. There they are again, back in Kenwyn churchyard. Did they come back on the train? Did they go by horse and cart? No idea. But on the left-hand side, you can see the chaps from the Bell Foundry, and you can just vaguely make out on the right all the posh people in their smart hats and outfits. So they sat in the churchyard and they took the pictures of them. You can see all the inscriptions. That's the front four. That's the back four. All very smart. And there's Mr. Bentley, who looked after or oversaw that particular restoration. And we got a picture of him, of the tenor bell, sat in the tower as it is now. And we think that's the original weights of the bells that came back with the bells 1905. So, of course, they had to have a peal on the bells, didn't they? And there was a visiting band going round Cornwall. They managed to get the first peal in 1907. And we just put the names up there out of interest. By 1910, they rang the second, the third, and the fourth peals on the bells. And this time, they managed to have a few of the local ringers actually rang in those peals. And there they are, over on the left-hand side, the 1905 ringers. And there on the right, ringers in 1929, and some of the same names still appear. Going on, they had another picture in 1945 and another one in 1974. And some of you might know there's a very young Jane Hitchens there, who was a member of the Kenwyn band at the time. And there was Alan Carveth, who, even if you don't know him, might recognise the name. He's a ringer in Cornwall for very, very many years. So they had 50th peal on the bells, and you'll see that Alan Carveth rang the tenor in the 50th peal. And then 2005, they had the 100th peal on the bells. Alan Carveth again, there's his picture. He rang in the 100th peal, and that was his very last peal on the bells. So it was quite fitting that he rang in the 50th and in the 100th. Nothing much happened then till about 1973, when the bells again were getting difficult to ring. They were on plain bearings, so they went quite hard. So they had them rehung on roller bearings, clappers were done, wheels, pulleys, ropes, you name it, they did everything, put them back into good ringing order in 1973. Then they tried them out just before Christmas, had a rededication service again just before Christmas, all the important people from the area, and a bun fight in the Lich Gate afterwards. again, another appeal for the refurbishment back in 1973. Now, some of you who rang at Kenwyn a long time ago might remember that they used to be rung from the ground floor. It meant they had a long draft, but they all went quite well. But it seemed quite nice if we could go upstairs, and it gave them a little room underneath. Now, there aren't many pictures of the bells being rung from downstairs, so I searched through the archives, and we did manage to find just a couple. Now, I can't think who those two are who actually rang the bells for a wedding that day. But obviously, they didn't want to pay the ringers, so they felt they'd ring themselves. So, 1987, the bells went up into the gallery. On the right there, you can see the false ceiling that got put in. And every time the sallies go through the holes, you lose the sound. So we've got used to it, but a lot of visitors do still notice it. So anyway, it got to the point that the bells were getting more difficult to ring again. We were thinking, well, they need some work doing to them. But it was decided that rather do the work to the bells and then get it ruined because work's needed doing to the tower, we'd better start at the top of the tower and work our way down. So we did just that. You remember that pinnacle that fell through the church roof back in 1860? Well, we didn't want it to happen again. And on the left here, this is a different pinnacle, but we'd been advised the pointing was bad and it was unsafe. So up went the scaffolding and it was all repointed. And hopefully it should stay for a few years now. So there's a picture of the tower in the scaffolding. It's this left-hand pinnacle we had the work done on, whereas I think it was this right one that caused the trouble when it fell on the roof before. Having got the scaffolding up, we took the opportunity to refurbish the clock. So the clock face came down, went back to the works, repainted, regilded, and over on the right there, you can see it came back and we're really pleased with what it looks like. Now, underneath the roof of the tower, there's a set of metal beams. There was some debate as to whether the metal beams held up the roof, whether they supported the structure, or whether at some time they could be used for lifting the bells if they had to be raised. But the one thing we all knew was that they were in a dreadful state. And you remember from Owen's talk the other day, those of you that were here, he was talking about looking at where the metal goes into the walls, and you can see the cracking, the way the beams have split, the staining on the concrete there. And there's another picture, again, showing what a state they were in. So basically, it was all chiselled out into the wall. Everything was repaired, painted, restored. And although I haven't got any pictures of them, those upper beams are all perfect now. The next thing was the lightning conductor. We were told that if the lightning hit, we'd have a problem because the conductor wasn't working. So we then had to replace the whole of the conductor, which we did earlier this year. And you can see it's a wonderful view off the top of the tower over towards the cathedral and the river. It's really super up there. But we don't encourage people to go up there because the stairs are dreadful. So maybe that's a project for another time. So, at long last, we've done all the works to the tower. Time to do the bells and their fittings. Well, we weren't quite sure why they were so difficult to ring. So we had Taylors come along, Nicholson's came along, Matthew Higby came along. All the ringers piled up the tower and had a look. And they all had different ideas as to what the problems were, what should be done to sort them out. So in the end, it was decided that we go with Matthew Higby. And in March this year, it was all taken to the PCC. They were happy. They agreed to instruct Matthew to get on with the work. So I contacted him, and then what happened? Lockdown. Everything ground to a halt. But Matthew agreed he would undertake the work, you know, as and when, as it were. So what are we planning to do? Well, everybody had a go at measuring the wear on the bells. Everybody came up with different ideas. And some of you may remember from Owen's talk the other day, he said that if the wear got to 10%, then you ought to consider quarter turning them. Well, the figures there are the ones that were measured by Matthew Higby, which we think are the most accurate. But he says that in his opinion, we really should turn the quarter turn, the treble and the second. So that's the plan with those. Now, the treble itself, you have to pull and pull to keep it up at backstroke. Not that Robert will agree with me, but some of us not quite so strong people find it quite tricky. And there's a great debate as to why it's difficult to ring. What we do know is that the way it's hung with the gudgeons is a riveted or gudgeon, whereas the other bells, the back six, have a bolted gudgeon. There's some debate as to whether there's a problem with the gudgeon. Some people say it's a problem with the clapper because the clappers are worn. And I guess until they get up there and take it all to bits, we're not really going to know. So the gudgeon's got to be looked at. The clappers, all the current clappers, apparently those of you that know about clappers, they've got a full top, which is a rather unusual design. They've been refurbished and overhauled, they've been twisted, they've been painted, and basically their life expired. So the idea is they've all got to be replaced. Again, everybody's got their own ideas as to what type of clappers we should have. But if we go with Matthew, apparently they've got to be bespoke spheroidal graphite iron, which I can't say. And I know Owen doesn't think they're the best, but that sounds like possibly what they're going to be. So on the left are the clappers last time they were refurbished, the current ones. And on the right is a picture of something like what we'll hope they'll look like when all the work is done. So that's the clappers. And then the roller boxes, some of them are worn, some of them are in the wrong place, some of them are okay, but they're all going to be looked at, replaced, refurbished, or whatever. So that has to be done. The sliders and the runners, apparently on bells 1 to 6, their life expired and it's best to replace them. But apparently with the 2 back bells, if we just refurbish the current ones, hopefully they should be okay. So that's the plan there. The bell frame itself, it was repainted. Alan Carveth got it done by somebody who used to paint all the bridges for British Rail. And he just retired and he came and painted the bell frame, which I'm guessing, say, 20 years ago. And you can see how it's beginning to pit and rust. And I'm told there's a problem on this left picture with the foot of the frame where the fourth is suspended. So apparently the fourth has to be lifted out and some work done to that foot. And then that can all be put back together again. So the idea is that Matthew will come down, strip out all the bits to do with the bells and take them back to his workshop. We then get in a local contractor. We've had an awful job finding anybody who'd do it, but a local contractor to paint the frame and do all that. And then Matthew can come back and refit everything. The other problem actually up at the top of the tower is with the louvers. one or two of the slates in the louvers have come out, and if we can refix them from inside, we'll do that. The quinquennial surveyor has said that we have to have mesh to deter the bats, and some of the ringing people have suggested that we have gale breaker netting to deter the rain. But as we can't come to an agreement, it seems like we're having the mesh and the nets, which will keep everybody happy, hopefully keep the bats and the rain out. So that's what we're going to do. The estimate is round about £20,000 for the cost. The ringers at the moment have about 3,500 that they can take from their tower fund. A big thank you for everybody who came to my birthday cream tea back over 2 years ago now, which raised quite a lot of money. A big thank you to everybody who attended Norman and Steph's pancake party back in February, and they just got it in before the lockdown. So that was lucky because that raised us £1,000. Edward, who we remember with affection, kept bees, and he very generously donated pots and pots and pots of honey, which in itself has raised over £300. There have been coffee mornings, other donations have been received from all sorts of people. We've had money from funerals in the church, and they've given money to the bells, come from all over the place. I'm about to start applying for some grants, and hopefully we'll get a few more donations coming in. May have to have a few more fundraising events if we're ever allowed to have anything like that again. So that's basically where we are. We still got quite a lot of money to raise, but we are in the position now to put in the faculty, and the PCC will underwrite any money so we can go ahead with it. So if anybody wants to support us financially, as Hayley said, the details will be available later on, but I've just put up the Kenwyn Bell appeal details. And don't forget that also the Guild Bell Restoration Fund will take money off you, and that is allocated to restoration projects all over the diocese, so that's well worth supporting. So to conclude, thank you all for listening. This was the band as we were probably at one of the last weddings that we were able to ring for before the lockdown. So if you've got any questions, please don't make them too difficult because I probably can't answer them. But I'll stop sharing the screen now, and I hope that at least gives you an idea of what's happened in the past and what we're aiming for in the future. Thank you very much.